here, and I'm proud to be guided by black
Your time
excellence.
has expired. We'll now move to question time, and I'm going to Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Was the Assistant Treasurer reflecting government policy on interest rates this morning when he said, and I quote, "We think that what's already in the system should do the job to ensure that we can dampen down demand," end quote?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I just missed the end of the question, but I think I've got it. Yeah, actually, if you wouldn't mind. Sorry, I just missed the end of it.
If you wouldn't mind repeating.
So, thank you, Senator Reyes. I'll do that. Was the Assistant Treasurer reflecting government policy on interest rates this morning when he said that, and I quote, "We think what's already in the system should do the job to ensure that we can dampen down demand," end quote?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I haven't actually seen the transcript of that interview, but I do understand that the Assistant Treasurer I do understand that the Assistant Treasurer was outlining about our government's plan to deliver on cost of living relief. He also indicated that the RBA has a tough job to do and that the RBA is independent. And those statements are correct. The RBA does have a difficult job to do. It is independent of government. It makes decisions based on the information that it has available to it at the time. The government's position reflects that. It's an independent body making decisions on monetary policy in this country. The area where the government has something to do is on making sure that our decision-making, the decisions we make in relation to the budget and others, do not make the job of the Reserve Banks harder. And that is the government's position.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Fawcett, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. President, despite the Minister saying that what they have in place would dampen down demand, the RBA said in its statement yesterday, and I quote, "The board expects that further increases in interest rates will be needed over the months ahead to ensure that inflation returns to the target and that this period of high inflation is only temporary." End quote. The Assistant Treasurer said this morning, quote, "I'm hoping if this is not the last," talking about interest rate rises, "it's near the last of the rate rises," end quote. Minister, why does the Albanese government contradict the RBA?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Gallagher.
Well, the government isn't contradicting the RBA, and I've read the governor's statement on the monetary policy decision, and it's very clear that the Reserve Bank is making decisions about how to deal with the inflation challenge and how to return inflation to more normal levels. It's a challenge not only for the Reserve Bank but for the government as well. And of course, the bank needs to make these decisions independent of any influence. That we have total and utter trust in them making the decisions that they need to do to ensure that inflation doesn't remain higher for longer. And they are saying that they are seeing inflation moderating. The challenge for the government in working with the Reserve Bank and not against it is to make sure that the decisions we take are supportive and working alongside monetary policy and not against it, which is why the decisions we're taking in the budget are informed by that.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Fawcett, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. With the increase in the cash rate to 3.35%, the 8th successive rise under your government, it will add more than $10,000 in extra repayments for the average Australian family with a variable rate mortgage.
She couldn't answer that yesterday.
With no plan to tackle inflation, a treasurer distracted by writing essays, and an assistant treasurer who contradicts the central bank, isn't it the case that Australians will keep paying more under your government?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Conveniently, in that question, left off the fact that there was an interest rate increase during the month of May when you were in government, and that the highest rate of inflation the highest quarter of inflation growth was in the March quarter last year.
Who was in government then?
And who was in government then? This is an inflation challenge that we inherited. We inherited this challenge.
Order.
The government has a plan to deal with it.
Order.
It's to deal with cost of living relief, where we don't add to inflation. It's to deal with some of the supply chain problems that we've been seeing as a result of the war in Ukraine and the end of the pandemic. And the third thing is to deal with the budget mess that we inherited from you lot, and to show spending restraint in some of the decisions that we take in the May budget. So it's incorrect to say the government doesn't have a plan. We do have a plan. We are implementing the plan, and we look forward to more of that in the budget.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Marielle Smith. No, I beg your pardon, Senator Sheldon. I need my glasses on.
Good, thank you. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. The situation in Turkey and also in Syria continues to deteriorate. What else will the government do to assist those in affected areas?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Sheldon, for the question. And I know I speak for all in this chamber that we have been watching the heartbreaking scenes from Turkey and Syria with horror. Yesterday, as I indicated to the chamber, the Prime Minister announced an initial commitment of $10 million in humanitarian aid to support the people affected. I'm also pleased to announce that earlier today, following advice from my department, I agreed to activate an AusAssist plan to deploy an urban search and rescue team of up to 72 personnel to Turkey to assist local authorities. Our National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, is now conducting an urgent assessment to ensure the safety of Australian personnel. NEMA is working closely with Fire and Rescue New South Wales, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the ADF to coordinate the deployment as soon as possible. These are urban search and rescue specialists, highly trained to locate, deliver medical assistance to and remove victims who have been trapped or impacted by a structural collapse. These are extremely difficult times. I think all of us have been horrified by the scenes of devastation and the stories of human tragedy that we are witnessing. There is also so much heroism and compassion for one's fellow man and woman and child that is on display in these areas, which already have been so devastated in many cases. So if we are able to assist, notwithstanding we are a long way away, I'm sure all of us would want the government to support our personnel to engage in such assistance.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Sheldon, first supplementary.
Can the Minister update the Senate on assistance being provided to Australians and their loved ones impacted by the unfolding emergency?
Minister Wong.
I know that this is distressing not only to all Australians, but particularly to members of the Turkish Australian and Syrian communities, particularly those with loved ones in the areas. And I thought Senator Birmingham's contribution yesterday, where he spoke about their experience, was very moving. Australian diplomatic missions in Ankara, Beirut and Istanbul are working closely with local authorities to ascertain the welfare of our citizens. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is providing consular assistance, including to the families of 4 Australians who were in the region at the time of the earthquake, and I regret to say at this stage remain unaccounted for. Obviously, their safety is our immediate priority, and consular officials in Ankara are working with local authorities and others on the ground to assist them. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is working to provide consular assistance to around 40 other Australians and their families who are in the earthquake area.
Minister Wong, the time for the answer in this question has expired. Senator Sheldon, second supplementary.
Can the Minister provide an update to the Senate on how Australia's initial contribution is assisting those on the ground?
Minister Wong.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced, as I said, the initial $10 million contribution in humanitarian aid. Today, I can provide some update to senators about how these resources are being used and intended to be used. UNICEF has commenced assessment of water infrastructure and health infrastructure damage. They have dispatched more than 1,000 pre-positioned water, sanitation and hygiene kits and are pre-positioning another 10,000 kids. UNICEF is also leading the education response for displaced families seeking shelter in schools. Local Red Cross and Red Crescent teams have been assisting with search and rescue, transportation to hospitals and first aid and distribution of essential non-food items. We will continue to work with partners to do all that is possible to assist those affected by this tragedy.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scarr.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. The Prime Minister in October 2019 supposedly led the charge to kick John Setka out of the Australian Labor Party, where he said, quote, "John Setka isn't welcome to stay as a member and I'm pleased he is gone," end quote, and his values aren't the same as Labor's values, end quote. Given that Mr Setka's CFMMEU division gave the Australian Labor Party over $1 million in the last financial year, can you confirm that Mr Setka's supposed expulsion from the party was nothing but a fancy charade, considering you still accept his tainted money?
Thank you, Senator Scarr. Minister Wong.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting, isn't it?
The old broken record.
Yes, we can always assume that those opposite will fight about climate change.
Yep.
And will unite around trade unions against trade unions.
Order.
It's one of the few things you actually agree on.
Order.
We have made clear, the Prime Minister has made clear as leader of the party his views about Mr Setka's personal membership of the Australian Labor Party. There are many people who might point to the failure of those opposite at times to deal with some people in their ranks, but the Prime Minister, as leader of the party in opposition, was clear about his view of Mr Setka's membership of the Australian Labor Party, and that matter was dealt with by the party organisation. The matter of donations is a matter, as you know, for the party organisation.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Scarr, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. I'm not sure what the High Court has said about climate change, but I know what they've said about the CFMEU. They've actually called it a recidivist offender and that the CFMEU considers law-breaking to be a cost of doing business. Can you confirm that the Prime Minister is willing to ignore the behaviour of Mr Setka in the CFMEU because of their $4.3 million in donations to the Labor Party?
Thank you, Senator Scarr. Minister Wong.
That allegation is untrue, and the senator knows it. We have been clear about our view that law-breaking, that criminal conduct in any context is unacceptable.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Second supplementary, Senator Scarr.
Thank you, President. In contradistinction to the Prime Minister, Premier Malinowskis intervened to ensure South Australia Labor returned a donation of $125,000 from the Victorian CFMEU. When will the Prime Minister Albanese show the same leadership as Premier Malinowskis and return federal Labor's multi-million-dollar donations from the CFMMEU?
Thank you, Senator Scarr. Minister Wong.
As I've indicated in my previous answer, the Prime Minister has made clear his views about Mr Setka. He has made clear his views and the Australian Labor Party's views about compliance with the law, and matters of donations are the responsibility of the party organisation.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Steele-John.
Thank you, President. Next month, my question is to the Foreign Minister. Next month marks 20 years since the Howard government's participation in the catastrophic invasion of Iraq, a war that has killed hundreds of thousands, displaced millions, and left millions more with a trauma that will last generations. Is it the government's view that the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq was illegal under international law and convention?
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. Minister Wong.
As the senator would know, The Australian Labor Party at the time placed its views on the public record on these issues. I don't intend to add to them, and nor do I believe at this stage in 2023 that this is the most important foreign policy priority that the government faces. The more important foreign policy priority that this government faces, that this parliament faces, is the fact that we live in the most difficult strategic circumstances since World War II. And we have to make decisions as a people, as a government, as a parliament about how we deal with that. The government has been clear. We will deal with that by utilising all levers of Australian power, both through investing in strategic capability but also investing in our diplomatic capability, investing in our diplomacy, in our relationships, because this is part of how we try and keep Australians safe, how we work to keep Australians safe at a time where we face these difficulties in our region. And I've spoken at length about this. Now, it may be that you wish to engage in an historic accounting. That's a matter for you, Senator Steele-John. My focus is very much on what we have to do now and into the future.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Steele-John, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, of all the responses I prepared for, an effective no comment was not one of them. Let me try one more time. The United Nations has declared the invasion illegal. The advice given to your party was that the invasion was illegal. The broad legal consensus is that the US invasion was illegal. Is it the current view of the Australian government that the US invasion of Iraq was illegal under international law and convention?
That's time. Thanks, Senator Steele-John. Minister Wong.
Look, I don't propose to add to the response I gave to the primary. Well, no, because it is the same question. I'm sure through estimates you can speak to the international lawyers in the room if you wish to do so, because this ultimately is a question that might be determined by an international tribunal or court. But as Foreign Minister at this time, given the responsibility and privilege of the job I have, I'm really clear about what my priorities are, and I've outlined them in the earlier answer.
Thank you. Order. Senator Steele-John, before I invite you to ask your second supplementary, I remind you that to ask the question and refrain from commentary. So please ask your second supplementary.
Thank you. 20 years on, will the Labor government, in the name of all who have died and all who continue to suffer, commit to releasing all relevant documentation surrounding the advice to the Howard government about the invasion of Iraq so that Australians can judge for themselves the actions that were committed in their name and whether those actions were illegal, given that we went to war without a single politician being asked to cast a vote?
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. Minister.
First, in relation to the first part of the answer, I'll take on notice what documents can or can't be released. And I'm sure we can have a conversation about this further at estimates. As I said, obviously the Australian Labor Party has made its previous views on these matters clear, but I would also point to your last comment. I think your last comment suggests that, as per the Greens policy, that there should be a parliamentary vote before the executive can commit the ADF to any conflict or to any other part of the world. I've made it clear in discussions in estimates that that's not a view that I share. It's not a view that the government shares. We do believe in ministerial accountability. We do believe the parliament should be entitled to appropriate to scrutinise the decision of the executive. The executive should account to the parliament for such a decision, but it is, in our view, important for the security of the country that that remains a power and prerogative of the executive.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Marielle Smith.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister please update the Senate on how the Albanese government is strengthening Medicare?
Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Smith for the question. Last week, the Prime Minister chaired the National Cabinet meeting, which included consideration of the report from the Strengthening Medicare Task Force. Senators will recall that Labor went to the election with a commitment to improve primary care through $750 million commitment to strengthen Medicare, and the establishment of the Strengthening Medicare Task Force, and to take the interjection to establish urgent care centres across Australia, which we are also doing, and working with the states and territories to improve access to after-hours emergency care. I should point out, Ms. President, that we were the only party to commit additional investment in Medicare at the 2022 election, probably not surprising in the sense that the former government had done everything they could to undermine Medicare over the years, cutting it, putting the indexation rates and capping the indexation rates so that it affected general practice. Labor is the only party of Medicare. We know this mob over there wanted to end it. We know you want to undermine it. It's the backbone of our healthcare system. It's the foundation that has provided the care that Australians need, deserve and expect, and the Australian people expect their government to look at ways to invest in Medicare, not to weaken it, not to cut it, but to look at ways to make it work better for them and put downward costs on the expenses of accessing healthcare. We know we've got a big challenge ahead. We've got an ageing population, more chronic disease, complex care needs, and the Australian community needs and expects Medicare to be there to meet their needs. We can't do this alone. We will work in partnership with the states and territories to make sure the health system meets the needs of the future.
Thank you, Senator Gallagher. Order. Order. Interjections across the chamber are disorderly. Order. Senator Wong. Order. Senator Ruston. Senator Marielle Smith, first supplementary.
Thank you. Can the minister outline why Medicare needs strengthening?
Minister.
Yes, I can. I thank Senator Smith for the question. Primary health care is in crisis. The Shadow Minister herself has said that our health system is in crisis at a number of levels, and she even went on to say perhaps we should have been more challenging in reform.
Henderson.
Oh, what does that mean? That was Senator Ruston, Shadow Minister for Health. We should have been more challenging in reform. What does that mean? Co-payments? It might be. Cuts? It could be. They were the reforms that the government, when you were in power, sought to put in place. The crisis in primary health care is a product of deliberate decisions made by the former government. There is no person in Australia who bears more responsibility for this than the now Leader of the Opposition, a man voted by Australia's doctors as the worst health minister in a generation. It's a hard award to get, but he won it.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Marielle Smith, second supplementary. Order on my left. Senator Marielle Smith.
Thank you, President. Can the minister outline the major challenges to strengthening Medicare?
Minister.
Thank you, Senator Smith. I can. There are challenges, including the considerable workforce challenges that we inherited and that we are dealing with. And one of the biggest challenges we're dealing now is the legacy of terminating measures, unfunded measures in the health and aged care portfolio left to us by the coalition. We see what must have happened when the health and aged care ministers went to ERC. They must have gone to ERC and said, we need some extra money for these things. And the ERC must have said to them, well, you can have it for 1 year, or maybe 2 years, and then it's going to end. And that's what we're dealing with now, hundreds of measures that terminate, that just end. 30th of June, no more money. Sorry, adult dental program. We know that adults still have teeth and might still need dentist services after the 30th of June, but we're not going to fund it. It's a terminating measure. Well, we're dealing with that. We're cleaning up your mess.
Thank you, Minister Gallagher. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. My question is the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. The Prime Minister has stated that an Indigenous voice to Parliament will consult Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on matters that affect them. If that's the case, will you please provide the Australian people and me with the government's list of all the matters which don't affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
Given I'm asked about the voice, I would like to acknowledge, if I may, the 10 leaders from empowered communities who are in the President's Gallery today as part of their visit to Canberra to advocate from the grassroots for constitutional recognition through the voice to Parliament. Senator Hanson, I appreciate your position on the voice, and I think you've made that clear, and probably no answer I will give you will satisfy you, because I think you have made your opposition to this clear. I would make this point. I would first make the point the voice is about two things. It is about recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in our constitution, and it is about consultation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on matters that affect them. In terms of the various aspects of detail, I would make 2 points. First, the referendum working group have already offered principles of what the voice would look like. The second point I make is, if Australians see fit to change our constitution in the way I hope they do, you, alongside with every other member and senator in this parliament, will have a say in how that voice operates, because it is Parliament that will legislate. There will be consultation and there will be legislation, just as you have a right at the moment to respond to and deal with legislation that comes before the chamber.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
No.
Oh, sorry. Yep, you're right. Are you on a point of order?
Matter of relevance, it's past half the time of the minister to respond to my question. It was directly matter. I asked directly about what matters that will that don't affect the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Hasn't even touched on that whatsoever.
Senator
It's a matter of relevance.
You've raised a point of order. Please resume your seat. You also asked at the beginning of your question about a broad question about the voice. You referred to comments the Prime Minister had made, so that Minister Wong is being relevant. Please continue.
Well, Senator Hanson, I'm not Senator Hanson. I am trying to respond very honestly, because the reality is those matters will be the subject of a discussion in this parliament and a discussion with the community should Australians vote for a constitutional recognition. What people.
Order, Senator Hanson. Senator Hanson, order. You've asked your question. Senator Hanson, I've called you to order. It's an order, not a request. The minister is answering your question. You may not like the answer, but she's answering your question. Please continue, Minister Wong.
Senator Hanson, through you, President, what Australians are being asked to vote for on is a principle of whether there should be a voice. The detail will come from the Parliament and the government that is elected by the people, and it is for the Parliament and future parliaments to determine the detail of how it works, including the issues that you describe.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Last month, the Minister for Indigenous Australians said that if the proposed voice to Parliament had been established earlier, then we would not be where we are with escalating violence and crime in Alice Springs. Will the minister please provide the direct evidence supporting this claim, and does the Prime Minister support this claim?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
Senator Hanson, I think that everybody in this place, I would hope, understands that the challenges that we see and some of our colleagues are living in Alice Springs and in the Northern Territory are not new challenges. And to pretend otherwise is disingenuous. And I would hope that the principle that if you work with local communities and listen to local communities, you achieve better outcomes. And, you know, Senator Hanson, we're very different, come from very different political places, but I do recognise that you do work in your community. You do engage with your community. And I would think you would understand that policy is intrinsically better if there is an engagement with and listening to the community. The voice is about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people having a say. That's what it's about. And I think we are stronger when people have a say.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
Well, I hope you can answer the third one, because I have had no response to the second or the first one for that matter. If the referendum rejects the voice being inserted in the Constitution, will the government legislate a voice that will clearly be against the will of the people?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
We are working to achieve a change to our constitution in accordance with the wishes of so many of our First Nations people who very eloquently articulated this offer of recognition, consultation and a path forward together in the Uluru Statement. And we are hopeful that there will be enough people of goodwill in this place and in the community to ensure that we are able to do that, to do what was sought and insert a provision into our constitution. That is what we are doing. So,
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Hanson.
Relevance to the question. I asked a question.
Senator
if
Hanson,
the referendum does not
Senator
get
Hanson,
up, will they legislate?
Senator
yes or
Hanson,
no? Very simple.
I've called you to order. You stand up and you ask a point of order. You talked about the outcome of the referendum, and that is exactly what the minister is referring to. Please continue, Minister.
we are optimistic and we are hopeful about the referendum, and that is the focus of the government's work. And I don't propose to get into a what-if, Senator Hanson, because our job as the government is to do what we said we would do if we were elected. And our job is to keep faith with the commitment we gave not only the Australian people in the Broad, but our First Nations Australians, and we will do so.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Little.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Aged Care, Senator Gallagher. Senator, how many Australians have died from COVID in residential aged care since 2022 election?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. I'm not sure I have figures since the election. No, I can give you the
Order.
She's not the minister.
Order.
He was the minister.
No.
He was the
Order.
minister. She's a representative
Okay.
minister. He was the minister.
I've got them.
Minister Gallagher. Minister Gallagher.
If you no, I've got
Please
the
resume.
answer.
Minister Gallagher.
Okay, you asked in 2022.
Minister Gallagher,
You
I've
asked-
asked you to resume your seat. The minister was part-way through a sentence and then the chamber on my left particularly became so disorderly I could not hear her response. I would ask you to listen in respectful silence. Minister, please continue.
As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, as the 2nd of February there have been 5,067 deaths nationally, 686 in 2020, 226 in 2021, 3,855 in 2022 and 300 in 2023. Now, given the seriousness of the issue that we are talking about, which is the passing of older Australians in aged care facilities, I think your behaviour just then was disgusting. I think it was disgusting. You ask a question like that and you behave like that. Absolutely disgusting. I have the information. The difference between me and what happened to Senator Colbeck is that I actually had the information. I'm aware of the numbers. I'm aware of what's happening in aged care.
Senator McCarthy.
So have a laugh over there. Have a laugh, by all means.
Minister Gallagher.
And
Minister
disrespect
Gallagher.
the thousands of people
Minister
in
Gallagher,
aged care.
I have a order. Order. Senator Cash, I have a senator on her feet. Senator Urquhart.
Of order. I would ask Senator McGrath to withdraw that statement, what he called Senator Gallagher.
Thank you. Senator McGrath, I did not hear the comments that were made by you or any other senator, but I would ask you to reflect and in the interests of the good spirit of the chamber, ask you to withdraw without
everything that I called Senator Gallagher.
Senator, thank you. Senator McGrath, please resume your seat, Senator. Senator McGrath, when I ask senators to withdraw, I ask them to do it respectfully. Senator McGrath, you did not do it respectfully. I would ask you to do it respectfully.
The point of order taken by Senator Urquhart asked me to withdraw a comment. You said you didn't know which comment. You asked me to respectfully withdraw a comment. I said many things. I withdrew all of them, and I withdraw all of them
Senator McGrath,
to assist the smooth running of the.
Senator McGrath, you did not withdraw respectfully.
I withdraw respectfully.
Thank you. Senator Little, were you on a point of order?
Yep.
Order! 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 Senators Wong and McGrath. Again, I have Senator Little on her feet. Order. I'm still waiting. Senator Little, first supplementary.
Order is point of order is relevance.
Oh.
The question was specific to.
I understand Senator Senator Gallagher has finished her response. So
That was an
I'll
indicator.
move you now to your first supplementary.
Okay. Why did your government change the way aged care deaths are reported on the exact same day that we saw more aged care residents had died from COVID in 8 months under your watch than in 2.5 years under the Coalition? What are you trying to hide?
Thank you, Senator Little. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you. And can I again just say that any death in relation to COVID-19 and indeed in residential aged care is a tragedy. I think the behaviour of those opposite on the previous question reflects on them and speaks for themselves. Data on the number of deaths in residential aged care are reported directly from aged care providers to the department. This is not an official data set and is used for aged care surveillance purposes. It is not directly comparable with published figures on the total number of COVID-19 deaths in Australia.
Senator Ruston.
On a point of order, I think the question was very specific around why you changed the means of reporting, not actually asking for a reiteration of how that is reported.
I think the minister is being relevant, but I shall listen carefully. Minister, please continue.
Well, if you want me to, I reject the assertion and the implication of the way the question is put. So that's my answer to the question. I am explaining about how aged care deaths in Australia are reported. If you're not interested in that, that's not my problem. You asked the question, I'm trying to answer it. The review and adjustment to COVID death reporting, including the timing to release the updated data, was a decision of the department. The Minister for Health was briefed in advance of the release of the data.
Senator Little, second supplementary.
In February 2022, the now Prime Minister said that deaths in aged care was a measure of performance. We know that more aged care residents have now died from COVID in 8 months under the Albanese Labor government than in the entire first 2.5 years of the pandemic. Given this tragic statistic, will the Prime Minister now admit that he has completely failed the important measure of performance and step up to the job of protecting older Australians?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Well, we are doing everything we can to ensure, and the mortality data, and I will correct the record if I have to, but the mortality data that I'd seen is decreasing compared to the first waves when residents in aged care were completely unprotected because of the way you rolled out the vaccine rollout. When you rolled out the vaccine rollout and you didn't meet your own targets, you set yourself the targets.
Order.
What we saw
Order.
was people in residential aged care that were completely unprotected.
Senator Wong.
I can barely hear Senator Gallagher, and she's here. Well,
I have asked all members in this place to refrain from commenting and arguing across the chamber, from calling out repeatedly, and I would ask once again that you listen respectfully. Minister.
Thank you. The difference between the approach now and the numbers of people with the different waves was that back in 2020, people were left completely unprotected because of the bungle in the rollout. What we have now with Omicron is that the vast majority, in fact very high numbers, of people in residential aged care are protected through the vaccination program.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Rice.
My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Minister Watt. Minister, the Samuels review found that our logging laws, the Regional Forest Agreements, or RFAs, had weaker protections than EPBC legislation and inadequate Commonwealth oversight. Minister Plibersek's Nature Positive plan commits to increasing environmental protections for areas under RFAs. Given the need for urgent action to protect our forests, why is native forest logging still occurring under the regional forest agreements?
Senator Rice, thank you. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Rice, for the question. And I recognise this is an issue that you have a long history of activism in. Obviously, there are 2 states in Australia which have now decided to phase out native forestry, being Victoria and Western Australia. But there are a number of states that have not made that decision, and as you point out, native forestry around a number of states is regulated through regional forestry agreements. The reality is that, at this point in time at least, we are not in a position as a country to meet all of our timber needs through plantation forestry. Plantations, it's estimated that plantations supply somewhere like 85 to 90% of timber and paper and products in Australia, and it is completely unrealistic to think that if we were to ban native forestry immediately in the form that you're suggesting, that we would be able to meet our timber, paper and other wood product needs. Quite apart from the impact that such a decision would have on regional communities and the jobs that are delivered through those industries. So it's a little like, when I hear these sorts of comments from the Greens, it's a little like the claim and the argument that we should be shutting down all coal and gas tomorrow as well, ignoring the fact that that would bring the electricity network to a halt, that would mean that people's lights would go out. Similarly, if we were to end native forestry today in the way that you suggest, we would not be able to meet our timber and paper and other wood product needs. Unfortunately for the Greens, some of us choose to live in the real world, where we actually need to be making decisions about what will actually happen in the world, and we as a government of course support responsible, sustainable forestry. Minister Plibersek has flagged an intention to look at how this practice is conducted in consultation with stakeholders, but we need to be real.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Just before I come to you, Senator Rice, if you wouldn't mind just resuming your seat. Senator Henderson, when I call you to order, that's what I expect. Senator Rice, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Minister, at COP15, the Australian government committed to take urgent action for zero extinctions after 2030. There are hundreds of rare, threatened and endangered animals and plants that live in and as part of our forests, including the critically endangered wallet or Leadbeater's possum and the greater glider. Minister, in this real world, the RFAs are allowing these species to continue their trajectory towards extinction. Will you scrap the RFAs and end native forest logging as part of your government commitment?
Minister Watt.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Rice. I've already outlined the reasons why it would not be a prudent move to do the kind of things that you're talking about, whether we're talking about supplies, whether we're talking about regional economies and jobs. But it is the case that we do want to make sure that Australia's forestry industry is as sustainable as possible, and that's why Minister Plibersek, in responding to the Samuels review last year, said, and I'll quote, "Regional forestry agreements are designed to have regard to environmental values such as old-growth forests and wilderness, endangered species and World Heritage matters, but they are currently exempt from the EPBC Act, which makes them unique. As part of our government's reforms, we will begin a process of applying our new national environmental standards to regional forestry agreements. We will consult with stakeholders on how this will be done. We want to make sure that the management of our forestries in this country is done as sustainably as possible, but we do need to meet some of the current timber and paper product needs that our country has. But we flagged an intention to consult with stakeholders as we apply those EPBC
Watt.
principles.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Rice, second supplementary.
Minister, scientific analysis shows that ending native forest logging would have very significant benefits to the climate and would be the easiest and most significant land use change that could be implemented to help Australia meet its carbon reduction targets. Minister, given your government's commitment to tackling the climate crisis, won't you scrap the RFAs and end native forest logging?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Well, as I say, Senator Rice, I invite you to let the Australian people know how we would meet our timber and paper product needs if we were to end native forestry immediately in the way that you suggest. I also invite you to explain to the Australian people what effect on the environment it would have if, as a result of ending native forestry overnight, instead Australian importers were to turn to forestry activities overseas, which have far worse environmental standards than our own country does. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have a sustainable forestry industry, that we can meet our timber and paper product needs, but that we have strong environmental principles around it. And that's exactly what Minister Plibersek has flagged as part of the implementation of the Samuels Review.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much, Madam President. My question is to the Minister for Trade and Tourism, my good friend Senator Farrell. International students make an important contribution to the economy and diversity of communities across Australia. How is the international education sector faring in the aftermath of the pandemic, and what are the long-term effects of the former government's complete lack of support and the former Prime Minister telling students to go home?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Senator Farrell.
I'll take that interjection. I'll talk to you afterwards. But they're all good. They're all good. Thank Senator O'Neill for that question, and I know she has a great interest in education, particularly the topic of her question, which was international education. And regrettably, President, international education was one of the hardest hit sectors of our economy during the pandemic. With students unable to travel to Australia, the former government's bungling meant that many education institutions were not able to access financial support. Worst of all was the damage done by the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, which damaged our international reputation by telling international students to go home. Scott Morrison, yep, that's what he said. That's what he said. That's what he said, Senator Watt. Scott Morrison made it clear that his government—
Senator Farrell, I just remind you to refer to people in the other place by their correct titles.
I'm sorry, Madam President. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison made it very clear that his government didn't care about international students, didn't care about educational institutions, and most importantly, he didn't care about those who relied on them to support their families. The message to parents of international students was that the Morrison government didn't care about their children and didn't want them here. In one single press conference, the former Prime Minister caused a massive setback of $40.3 billion industry.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you. With international travel normalising and international students being able to resume their education on campuses here in Australia, what is the current state of play for the international education sector?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Senator Farrell.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator O'Neill for her question. Well, of course, we hope that international travel is normalising, but with no thanks to the previous government, the sector remains one of the largest export industries. Its recovery is testament to the quality education our institutions offer and the hard work of industry and government agencies. In December, there were over 452,200 student visa holders in Australia. Not pre-COVID levels yet, but the industry, pleasingly, is recovering. The Albanese Labor government is proud to be welcoming back international students from across the world. While China is still our largest and most valuable market, diversification is occurring and growth in other markets including India, Nepal, Colombia and Vietnam. Last year, Austrade supported the India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Your time has expired. Senator O'Neill, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President and Senator Farrell. Looking to the future, what is the Australian government doing to support the international education sector to assist the recovery you were describing?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill. Well, a lot more than the previous government is the answer to that. That's the answer. The answer to that question. My agency, Austrade, which is responsible for promoting Australia's international education offerings globally, has been working hard to support the sector's recovery. Dedicated staff in 36 locations provide advice, support and connections to registered Australian international education clients. Austrade's International Education Centre of Excellence oversees the sector strategy and manages the Study Australia website. Recent upgrade to the Study Australia website have new users increased by 24.7% in 2022, with over 7.5 million unique page views, up 28% on the year.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Dean Smith.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. At the last election, Labor promised a building capacity, building community policy aimed at increasing capacity in the Australian charity sector. And in the October budget, the Albanese government committed to a Productivity Commission review of the framework that incentivises philanthropic giving to charities. Can the Minister confirm that as of today, no further announcements have been made on either Labor Party promises?
Thank you, Senator Dean Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, Senator Smith. I never know what questions are going to come from you, and I think in respect to the chamber I will have to take that on notice. Hang on, I'll see whether I can find something on my feet. I'm not sure that's the same question that I got asked. I think it's probably, in the interest of getting you an accurate answer, Senator Smith, I think it wasn't in my top list of issues to prepare for in question time today, but I will come back to the chamber with any information I can.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dean Smith, first supplementary.
I agree you should trust me first. Does the Minister agree that the charity sector, facing unprecedented demand due to the cost of living crisis and Labor's insufficient plan to address it, deserves a government that prioritises charities' urgent needs and delivers on its promises?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Smith for the question, and I would say that in the budget one of the largest line items that we had was to increase indexation to community organisations, some of whom are charities, who provide services to the community in response to the fact that they had been inappropriately, or the indexation that had applied was not adequate and not allowed them to continue to meet some of the costs they were incurring. That was in the order of several hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was in response to a request from ACOS and some in the charity sector to have a look at the indexation when we came into government. I undertook to do that. It was unfair. It had been left in an inadequate state, hadn't been addressed, and it was in a finance sense, quite costly to deal with, but we did that in the first budget in respect of the work that they do, the value that we place in it, and the fact that we recognise their costs were increasing and they needed extra support.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Smith, second supplementary.
The indexation matter is a good one, but it's not the subject of this question. How does the minister explain the government dragging its feet on delivering its modest commitments to Australian charities at a time when they are needed the most?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Smith for the question, and I don't accept the proposition that he puts. I know that my colleague, the member for Fenner, who has responsibility for this area, has been working closely and is focused on this area. I just don't have an update of where all of that work is, but I have undertaken to come back to the chamber and provide that information and that update, and perhaps it's something that we can explore in estimates, Senator Smith. Now that I'm aware of your interest in it, I will make sure that officials and myself are briefed fully so that we can take you through all the work that has been being done. But I know that the focus of the assistant treasurer has been to focus in this area. I have some information on fundraising reform, but I'm not sure it answers your question.
Thank you, Minister Gallagher. Senator Walsh.
Thank you very much, President. And my question is to the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher, also. And I'm confident that my question is at the top of your priority list, Senator Gallagher. And also at the top of the priorities of the whole Albanese government. Senator Gallagher, can you please update the Senate on how the Albanese government is taking action to close the gender pay gap?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Walsh for the question. And I can assure the chamber this is a question that I have prepared for earlier, but it is an important subject, and I'm proud to be a member of a government that's introducing the Workplace Gender Equality Amendment Closing the Gender Pay Gap Bill into the parliament later today. This is an important step forward in advancing gender equality in Australian workplaces. Together with the remade instruments under the Act, it fulfils a key election commitment of our government to close the gender pay gap at work, including by boosting pay gap transparency and taking action to help close the gender pay gaps within organisations. On average, women working full-time can expect to earn 14.1% less than men per week in their pay packets. Current projections suggest that this will take another 26 years for this gap to close. This is too long, and women shouldn't have to wait, nor should our daughters or those that are being born today, those girls being born today. It's not fair. We need to address it. With these reforms, we will, for the first time in Australia, publish gender pay gaps of businesses that employ 100 or more people. The reform only covers employers that already report to WGEA, and it will be drawn on existing reporting, so employers themselves will not need to provide any additional information. If they choose to, employers can provide information about their gender pay gap and any action they are taking to close it. And employers will have around a year to get ready, with the first reporting planned for early 2024. Gender pay gap data will be published on WGEA's website in a searchable tool available to the public. This will add to the rich data already publicly available on WGEA's website. Reporting will commence in 2024, and it draws on all of that data, as I said before, from information already collected. The legislation being introduced responds to the recommendations of the review of the Workplace Gender Equality Act 2012.
Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, for outlining those historic and very necessary reforms that I'm sure will be supported by all of us here in this place in the chamber. Could you go a little further and outline for us why it is that gender equality must be considered a core economic imperative, and why it is being considered a core imperative by our government?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister.
Thank Thank you, and thank you, Senator Walsh, for the supplementary. On average, across all jurisdictions and occupations, Australian women earn $263.90 per week less than men. That is a lot of money to be short each week, and it entrenches women's disadvantage and economic inequality. It's not right that women are missing out just because of our gender. It's not just bad for women, it's bad for our economy as well. The gender pay gap is estimated to cost our economy $51.8 billion a year lost when it comes to women's pay. The consensus on women's economic equality as a key economic priority was an important and actually the first outcome at last year's Jobs and Skills Summit. One of the immediate outcomes from the Jobs and Skills Summit was for the government to require businesses with 100 employees or more to publicly report their gender pay gap data to WGEA, which is implemented through today's legislations. And I should say employers benefit too, because gender equality makes good business sense.
Answering has expired. Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Minister. And of course, the historic reforms that you're talking about are really just the beginning for our government, and our commitment to gender equality as a core of our agenda is really just the beginning. Can you outline what other actions the Albanese government is taking to drive economic equality for women?
Minister.
Senator Walsh. For too long, Australia has fallen behind the rest of the world when it comes to gender equality, and I know many members in this place were at the UN Women Australia's breakfast this morning, and where this subject was talked about, I think, from all of the speakers who addressed us, including the Prime Minister and our leader here, Senator Wong. Under the previous government, Australia fell to 43rd of 145 countries on the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Index 2022, having ranked 15th in 2006. We ranked 50th for economic empowerment, and it fell as low as to 71st in 2021. We want to address this and improve on these results considerably. The Albanese government is working hard to restore Australia as a global leader on gender equality. Our budget put gender equality front and centre, investing over $7 billion to drive gender equality and reintroducing gender-responsive budgeting.
Has expired. Minister Wong.
President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
Thank you.